Hey guys, welcome back to November 2017 Nail the Mix. I'm Eyal Levi. With me are Carson Slovak and Grant McFarland. They're doing coordinates by August Burns Red. So before the break, they were talking about a cool tracking slash editing trick that they like to do. And I noticed in the chat room that you guys lit up and all said you wanted to try it. So instead of getting straight to the mix, we're going to take about 15 minutes, and Carson's going to walk you through that whole editing idea. We figured it would be a cool little bonus nugget of information for you guys to go with. So take it away, Dr. Slovak.
Cool. So, like I was saying before, the basic idea is if you can track just slightly slower and allow yourself a little bit of extra wiggle room in between when the guitar pick hits the string, when you're editing, especially if you're editing everything directly to the grid like we are in this case, it's going to make your life a lot easier and actually make all the edits sound way more natural, because what you're doing is eliminating probability of you having to create gaps if a riff is rushed. So if you're playing a riff at, say, 150 beats per minute, and you track it at 150 beats per minute, but he rushes something, and you have to hit and you have to chop and move a guitar hit to a certain grid, you're going to create a gap there where no information exists. There are some ways around that. You can pull the audio back over itself and do a long crossfade. You can use elastic audio and like time compression expansion to try to smooth it out. To me, the way that you introduce the least amount of artifacts in editing guitar is to track it like this. And it's funny, we were talking a little bit earlier, a lot of times we'll track, someone will track something, and when you're tracking only to a click and you only hear yourself in a click, your natural human inclination is to speed up a little bit. And that's with everyone, with drummers, with guitar players. I always find that when they only hear themselves and the click, they tend to rush a bit. The idea is, if you track it a little bit slower, a lot of times I'll track it and then move it into place and it'll be exactly at the right tempo and I don't have to do anything to it. So it's almost a weird way of trying to avoid having to edit stuff, or at least minimize what you have to edit, Again, there are so many advantages to tracking an instrument solo to a click, because you can hear all the little nuances of everything going on, and you can really choose with great detail what little pieces you want and know will work in your edit. So I'll just demonstrate kind of the idea behind this. I'm just going to pick a random part of the song. Spot. So I've copied this little section of rhythm guitar. I copy it over here. I guess, where did I pull this from? This is 184. So say, just for instance, that the tempo is actually 180, or I'm sorry, say it's 190, and we tracked it at 184, which is what this is currently at. So I'm going to set this tempo to 190, and this is kind of, imagine that this isn't a perfectly edited chunk of guitar. Say that he just played this, and he played it really tight, and now my only job is to time align it with the actual tempo of the song, which hypothetically in this scenario is 190. So we track this at 184, I'm editing it to 190. So what I would do, the good thing about tracking a DI that's grouped to the amp track like this is that you have a really good visual reference of where the transients are. So I'm just kind of tabbing over, and there are a couple different notes here, and I'm just kind of using the DI as a visual reference to see where the pick is happening. And obviously it's going to be pretty consistent here because this is an already edited piece of audio.
Rolling that up a little so that it's like higher up on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
How's that?
Perfect. Thank
Is that
you.
pretty good?
Perfect. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so pretty simple. I mean, I've just found the transients, I found where the notes are being hit, and I'm just kind of moving things back. I guess that was probably a weird... And the other thing you can do sometimes is use the nudge forward or back, which is just control plus or minus, and that moves, when doing this with a guitar, I usually set it to about 200 milliseconds, and then you can just kind of keep a note in its spot and nudge the interior data of the note back and forth, because obviously you can pull this out and you still have all that information there. And it's almost just like quantizing, you know, the guitar notes. But you see kind of the principle behind this. So you track something slightly slower, you edit it to the grid, you know, make sure everything is where you want it. Let's just stop there, for instance. Just for this example, rather.
Someone just said that is because the guitar player is a beast. I usually edit pussy picking. I can barely see transients on DI.
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, everyone picks differently. JB always has pretty good consistent picking, I've found. It's not hard to get a good clean take out of him because he's just a really good player. So yeah, I mean, having a good clean DI track and you can see the transients clearly is definitely a good visual reference.
But, I mean, I've worked with JB before. He plays well, but I wouldn't say that he's, like, the hardest player ever or anything.
No.
Like, I've worked with guys that hit way harder, too. So, I mean...
He's not, like, particularly heavy-handed,
Yeah,
but he's precise.
He's not heavy-handed at all, so...
You know, he's got a good sense of how he needs to play riffs
Yeah, so...
to come out
This guy
clearly.
must be tracking some really bad guitar players.
It might also be worth noting that this DI is colored because it's going through our API preamp, so there's a little bit of gain on it. It's not a totally clean DI.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of shit on it. But
Bad kind.
yeah. So, anyway, when I get to this stage and everything's you know, cut and put where I want it, I will just do a batch fade, 5 milliseconds usually, and then I've found that in relation to where the transient appears to be on your DI track, the sound of the pick attack is always a little bit before the beginning of the DI transient, and on like a heavily distorted amp. So what I'll do, since I've up to this point really just aligned all of these clips exactly to where they go and aligned the very beginning of each DI transient to the grid, I've essentially cut off all the pick attack. So in order to reintroduce that, I've got a little nudge trick that I like to do where I'll set this around like 600 milliseconds, the nudge value, and then move the inside of all that stuff back 600 milliseconds, and then treat the whole thing as a group and put it back into place. So effectively, it's just a kind of a workaround way of batch moving your edit points to reveal the pick attack before each DI transient, if that makes sense.
And for Pro Tools users, that would be Control and minus.
Yeah, I can do that again so you see. So Control minus would nudge all of the, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen, I know that's a no-no, would nudge all the information in the clips back that amount, and then hit minus again, and without the control, and it moves the whole chunk of what you have selected back into place where it was, the same value. So you've essentially just moved the edit points all together to the left. And that's just to make sure that you have the you know, the right pick attack and the natural, you know, sound of the transitions between note hits. So that's kind of that's the whole idea. And that's essentially how we tracked this album on guitar. Obviously, there are circumstances where this is not going to work. For really tight, precise rhythm guitars for metal, I like to do this. And it works well in ABR's circumstance, I think. There are parts on this album where we would track like a lead to the song itself, and we didn't do this at all. And we would just do it the old-fashioned way where you get a couple takes on playlists and you go through and pick your favorite moments of each take and comp them together into a perfect, awesome take just the way you want it. we did that sometimes. You know, there's a lot of expressive playing on this album, and a lot of very nuanced type of leads that they were real. The band was super specific about how they wanted them to sound and feel, and what kind of pickups to use for different parts. So this method of like really surgically editing stuff doesn't always work and doesn't always need to work in every scenario. It's just in this case, it's what we did. So.
Someone just said that they're going to now track all their leads like this.
Well, it works great for leads. If it's like, to me, I'll usually do this for everything except like solos, you know, or if it's like a really specific part that needs to feel a certain way and we can't get it with this editing technique, then we'll do, you know, we'll cross that bridge. But for the most part, it works really well just as a way to get clean edits and build in a little bit of leverage for yourself, so you're not stuck in a scenario where you have a really great sounding take that you love, but it's just a little too fast, and stretching it sounds like shit, and trying to do crossfade sounds like shit, you know what I mean? Like, and you have these gaps of space to fill because it was rushed. So.
And this prevents you from having to do note by note method.
Exactly, and that tends to just sound unrealistic.
Yeah.
I would rather have someone competently play a riff for real, slightly slower, just to allow me to edit it precisely, but he still played the riff like very competently. And in a lot of cases, like we said, half the time he's rushing anyway, so he's going to play the riff at speed, and I just pick the best one. And honestly, I'd say about 50% of the time I don't have to even edit,
By the way,
because that's kind of on average how much people tend to rush. And if you get the difference of what you're tracking at to what the song is actually at, right for the specific part, which it kind of varies depending on what's being played. But if you get that right, sometimes you don't have to touch it, and it's just in time, which is weird. But
this also works great with drums, by the way.
yeah, fantastic with drums.
You can make a great drummer actually sound, you can make the edits sound better than if a great drummer played it to tempo. It's not really about skill as much as it is just you know, an editing, you know, artifact kind of thing.
Right.
And you know, you can also take a poorer drum performance, you know, if it's played slower, and kind of fix it as well. So it really works in both scenarios. But you know, it's not something you have to do all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that great on clean guitar when you have something that's arpeggiated and notes are ringing out.
Especially on clean guitar, it really doesn't work that well at all unless you spend a lot of detail and time focusing in on the way notes bleed into each other. Because a lot of time with clean guitar, if there's sustained notes ringing out over each other, if you move a note forward, it will more drastically change the difference of the sound of the note decay when that second note hits. So you'll be able to, it sounds like an edit. It sounds like you moved something back and eliminated something. There was a little jump. And that tends to be somewhat of an issue when it comes to drums as well, because of cymbal resonance. So you can't track drums too much slower and then edit in this fashion, because the slower you track, the more time will elapse on average between hits. And if you move something back more drastically, then you're cutting a bigger chunk of the cymbal decay out of where it overlaps the next hit. So it sounds like the cymbals are here and then jump down for a second when the next hit hits, because you've eliminated time that they're ringing out and that natural decay. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful about it. We track drums very slightly slower for this record. Because of that reason, you can get away with this. You can get away with tracking slower when it comes to guitar, especially distorted guitar, like rhythms. But drums are a little less forgiving because they're very transient dense, and you've got a lot of cymbal resonance. You know, everything's ringing out and bleeding over each other, and you've got to get it, you know, to where the edits sound good, but they don't sound like an edit. I guess the whole idea is to edit to make it sound like you didn't edit it.
And just a little tip for those of you who play in bands, this is also a really good way to get tighter if you're a band that plays to a click. If your song is kind of at the bleeding edge of what you can play comfortably, just practice at 5 or 10 under, and not like 50 under, but just 5 or 10, and should really help. We used to practice that way too.
It doth.
Yeah, because it's still at close enough to the tempo where the feel is the same, so you're not going to be playing drastically different. It's just relaxed enough. It's the same reason for why this works. So, all right, thank you
Exactly.
so much for taking the time to
Real quick, the
show
other
that.
thing I will say, one just quick tag on that. The other thing that this method helps with too is the comfort of the performer, because, like Eyal was just saying, the performer's comfort level is going to increase if he's not working as hard to get exactly on tempo. If he can relax slightly and just slow down a little bit, they tend to get cleaner takes, especially when it comes to really notey guitar stuff. So.
And then, in some ways, it might sound better because if they're playing better, it feels better,
Yeah.
and you can go from there.
So there